Today on The Public Interest, we'll be talking with Representative Tracy McCreery about her priorities for the 2020 legislative session. Welcome to The Public Interest with David Stokes. I'm David Stokes. Today, we're talking with Representative Tracy McCreery, the state representative for the 88th District, about her priorities for the upcoming legislative session, the Democratic Party's priorities for the session, and a few local issues of interest to, I think, all of us and our viewers. Representative McCreery, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, we sit here in University City, and I recall that you were very briefly our state representative.
I was in 2012.
2012. Now, people would wonder how could it have been so brief? But I'll let you tell the story. But it was the combination of a special election plus redistricting,
right?
And then wham, all this work.
Exactly. So I ran for a special election in 2011. It was the state rep seat vacated when Jake Zimmerman became the St. Louis County assessor.
That's right.
And so I ran as an independent. I was the first woman in the state to run and win as an independent, actually. So I'll have a little asterisk in the Missouri history books, which I'm really quite proud of. But yeah, I live in Olivet, but the state representative district at the time swung into University City. So I was the state rep here for about a year. So
I remembered, and I do find this very interesting. I did remember that you were our state rep, but I had forgotten, although I was well aware of it at the time, that because party committees pick the candidates in a special election,
right,
and you were not chosen.
Right. I had seven of the 10 people that were eligible to pick chose me, but the votes were weighted, and so of the 3 people who didn't pick me, they had more weight in their votes.
So, and that is a peculiar process, which I will say is not the way it's done in the Republican Party.
Right, exactly.
Having been on those special election committees before, there is no weighting, and there's certainly arguments to both sides.
Right.
Like, why should the committee man for the district with 1 precinct get the same vote as the committee woman from the township with 100% of the group? Like, I do get both ways.
Yeah,
but
I get it.
It has quirks like happened to you too, where clearly.
Right. But what's
so then you launched an independent campaign.
I did when I did
the signatures.
Yeah, I went door to door and got probably 350 signatures or so from voters, and some of them, I was running as an independent, even though like my neighbors all knew I was a Democrat, and I had several people sign my petition saying, "Well, I'm not going to vote for you, but I think you have the right to be on the ballot so that voters can decide." And so that was a really cool exercise in democracy, if you will. So then you
do all that work,
right?
And you're in office for only a couple of weeks, I believe.
Well,
Maybe
a few months, yeah, and then
before they announced before the legislative panel draws the new district.
Right, exactly.
And you're suddenly redistricted in
with Jill Shoup.
With Jill Shoup.
Right, yeah, and Jill Shoup is kind of like a matriarch of the Democratic Party. And she had so much more experience, so I was not going to run against her. So there was an open seat with no incumbent north of Olive, about 3/4 of a mile from my home is where the line started. And so at that time, even though I was serving as an independent, the Democratic Party, I was going to run as a Democrat the following fall. And they asked me to run in this open seat, but then somebody ran against me in the primary, and I lost. So it's a really quite a whirlwind period in my life. So I won a special election as an independent in November, highest of highs, and then by August of 2012, I had lost a Democratic primary.
And then just a few years later, your state rep seat opened up.
Yeah, exactly. So Jill Shoup, who was the state rep at the time, when she ran for state senate, then she endorsed me, and I had her full support to run for that open state rep seat in 2014.
That's very interesting. The most interesting story that I know in that vein is, and most people would not know this, but Mayor Daley of Chicago, the father, the legendary Mayor Daley of Chicago, was his first election to office was in a special election as a Republican.
Wow.
And he had to be a Republican due to the rules at the time. It was, and I do not remember the arcane rules that say, but he actually got elected as a state rep from Chicago as a Republican in this special election. The Mayor Daley. Now he, in his first minute on the House, they made a motion to allow him to come over and sit with the Democrat Party.
Wow.
But he was first elected as
Interesting.
a Republican.
Wow.
So so how much longer? How many floor terms?
Well, yeah.
The whole special election then flummoxes your time in office,
Well,
or were you less than half a term?
It was less than half a term. So I actually, if I get reelected next November, which I hope I will have been able to serve for 9 years in the Missouri House. Almost everybody that comes in on the special election result gets that 9 years. Now, it doesn't always happen in the Senate, but I'll hopefully have 9 years in the House.
Well, best of luck in that. And
Thank
you
you
for joining us
Yeah.
today. One bill you had last year, which I understand you'll be reintroducing this year, which is important to a lot of people in the environmental community, certainly important to me, is to deal with the changes to the Clean Water Commission.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that, if you
Well,
if you will.
yeah, and I, not that I want to contradict the host, but I think that clean water is important to people that aren't environmentalists as well. You know, I've had the privilege of being able to travel all over the world, and not every place that you go can you assume that there's clean water coming out of the tap, or that the water that's feeding our crops is healthy. So, I truly believe that me using my voice to speak out for the importance of clean water is just a human issue, because everybody wants it for their family and their neighbors. So, yeah. So what happened in Jefferson City in the Missouri legislature is corporate interests, in my opinion, were able to manipulate the process of who sits on the Clean Water Commission, and they removed several regular Joe representatives. And so now, in my opinion, the Clean Water Commission is now loaded up with people who are putting corporate interests ahead of residential interests. And so what I want to do is restore the Clean Water Commission back so that there's some balance, because I truly I think diversity is a good thing, especially on boards and commissions, and you need to have a lot of different perspectives represented. And right now, the Clean Water Commission is too heavily swayed towards corporate interests.
Now, are there any just public representatives on the Clean
I think
Water
there are.
Commission
I just think that the number
they reduced the number.
They reduced the number, right? So it makes their voice a little less impactful. So I would like to just see us go back to the balance that we had before.
I certainly agree with you on this. I agree both generally, meaning that I think there's so many boards and commissions at the federal, state, and local level, and that they oftentimes they're dominated by interests of that industry.
Right.
And the argument is always, well, they are the ones who know what they're talking about, and there's of course some legitimacy to that.
Right.
But they're the same ones that have the bias to limit competition. In that case, I'm speaking generally. But I also agree with you specifically in the Clean Water Commission that I would like to see us not, of course, take away the industrial representation on it, but to sort of go back to where we were with a larger public representation on these boards and commissions is very good. And you have to give them authority too.
Right.
It's easy as the public representative on such a commission to be overrun by the people who admittedly can know more than you.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm trying to get back with my bill, is to just restore a little bit more, just individual representation on that board, so that the corporate interests don't outweigh the interests of the people in the state.
Well, that's very interesting, and I definitely wish you the best of luck in that. What are some of your other priorities for 2020?
Well, pre-filing for the Missouri legislature, the House side anyway, opens on December 2nd of 2019. So we're just a couple weeks away now of being able to, for all of us, the public, but also us legislators, to be able to see what might be some of the priorities coming down the pike. So, with 2020 being an election year, and some people saying it's going to be might be an election year of our lifetime, not so much at the Missouri level, but definitely at the presidential level. It'll be interesting to see what we decide to do. Sometimes, in my experience, you see election years where we don't get anything done because it's just everyone's more focused on their own campaigns and their own re-elections. But also, things are so different in politics these days that maybe 2020 will be an election year where things really just get going, and the majority gets some things across the finish line.
And what do you think, speaking on behalf of your party, what would be some of those priorities? And what specifically ways you think your party could work with the Republican Party to get some things across the finish line that might be of shared interest? Right.
Well, I think one thing that is of a shared interest from both sides of the aisle is that the state continue to support public education. That's one of those issues where both Republicans and Democrats come together and really do support the public schools. You know, I'm from a small town. The public school there is kind of the epicenter of the town. You know, it's like that's what you do on Friday night. You go to football games. There's, you know, there's the activity there. And I think it's important that we continue to adequately support school districts. You know, I live in a school district where we pretty much are funding it with local taxes through personal property taxes. We get very little money from the state, but there are school districts all around Missouri, especially in rural areas, that are very dependent on the state to help provide funding so that we can, you know, and although like I don't have kids in those rural school districts, I truly believe that Missouri's kids, I feel responsibility for all Missouri kids as a legislator. So I want to make sure we're doing what we can to give kids a good start at life.
Well, along those lines, do you think there's any need for consolidation in school districts in the state of Missouri, especially? Not that I would want to target rural areas with that state. I would talk about any overly small districts. Many of those happen to be rural areas, so not rural areas around St. Louis, where the districts tend to be large enough, but you get really into north central, northwestern Missouri.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen around the country as well, but I think it's important that that's done at the local level or the regional level. I want to make sure that the taxpayers out there have a say in what that looks like. I am not a big fan of, I don't like it when the feds come in and tell me as a state legislator what I can do or can't do, and so I want to make sure we're respectful of local school boards and let them decide what's best for them. But yeah, I think, you know, we've got to look at all kinds of things because the state of Missouri is underfunding transportation to schools by hundreds of millions of dollars. And there are lots of school districts now that are just on a 4-day school week. And that's not because it's best for the students. It's because the state is not helping these rural districts adequately fund transportation to get the kids to and from school.
And that's a real quirk in rural school consolidation.
Right.
Because you talk about even two really small school districts, and I'm sort of talking theoretically here, but I do know that if it can make all the sense in the world to consolidate, but if your district gets too big, you can't put kids on an hour-and-a-half bus ride each way. Like you run into just a logistical bus ride issue where you can't have a child spending 3 hours on a bus there and back each morning. So you can only get so large of an area, and sometimes to some degree you just have to accept a really small school district.
Right, exactly. But I think those decisions are best done at the local level for that very reason, because, you know, I can't sit here in St. Louis County and look at a map and know what's best for rural Missouri. Yeah.
Speaking of consolidation, I believe it was a controversial issue in St. Louis earlier this year. And, you know, if our viewers know that we had several episodes. In fact, during the first few months of the show, we were primarily talking about Better Together and city-county consolidation or just cooperation. It doesn't, as I've been saying for years, including in prior jobs, it doesn't have to be there's all sorts of things that can be done on a step-by-step basis. What do you think, if anything, the state's going to do about St. Louis City and St. Louis County relationship issues, like how it works, or will it mostly just sort of let the current Board of Freeholders thing go forward, presuming the city of St. Louis can't appoint anybody to the board?
I know, as of today, what is today, the 14th of November, you know, the city, there aren't even people to sit in the Board of Freeholder slots for the city slots. So I'm in the minority party, so I only know what I know from, you know, having conversations. But my hunch is that my colleagues in the majority party are going to decide to just let this Board of Freeholders process with the city and the county work its way out. Now, that doesn't mean that the freeholders don't come up with some action plan that requires state action that we would follow up on in future legislative sessions. But I think considering what we went through this spring with the Better Together proposal, I saw that was unbelievably a hot issue, and none of my colleagues were supportive of the process at all. We felt like it was very disrespectful of the voters that it would impact. You know, and so for me and for the vast majority of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the St. Louis caucus anyway, we felt very strongly that the vote should only be the people in St. Louis County and St. Louis City.
Do you think there'd be support for, I believe last year Dean Plocker introduced that legislation to require that. Do you think even if the state legislature allows the Board of Freeholders to move forward, do you think that type of bill could get passed this year? Just clarifying that, not even just St. Louis City and County, but in any type of consolidation issue,
right,
local voters have to give.
Right.
Local voters have to give.
Well, and when you look, I mean, this is kind of a nerdy thing, but I know you love this. Like when you look at how.
Thank you, I guess.
Hey, I'm embracing my nerdiness, but when you look at what happens in local government, like if a city is going to annex a rural area and bring it into the municipality lines, like both the impacted area has to vote on it. So I don't see why we wouldn't do that here as well. You know, it's just about being respectful to the taxpayer. But I would love it if Representative Dean Plocher filed that bill. One of the things I think we don't do enough in the Missouri legislature is proactively do things. You know, we tend to wait until something's on fire and then try to like ram a bill through to kind of fix something. But I think Representative Plocher's bill made a lot of sense. I would like to see that clarity. You know, I've only got 3 years left in office, basically. I would love to leave the Missouri House knowing that, you know, we have addressed that issue for future voters.
Would you be the dean of the House if you served all 9 years? Would you?
Oh.
Would you hold that title?
I probably.
Or is there somebody else with another special election person who might be?
Well, that's interesting. At the
term?
time, so I will be then. If I get reelected in November, I will be, because I came in with Chrissy Summer, Brandon Ellington, and Judy Morgan, and they'll all be gone. So I will be like a little bit ahead of everybody else. So yeah, but I'm a young-looking dean, though. You know.
Absolutely. But to sort of go back, what was about Better Together, and about not specifically so much to that plan, but about just general, should the city and county work together, share more? What is the opinion of the people in your district, in Olivet and Creve Coeur and Overland, and correct me if I've got any of your districts.
Yeah, so
incorrect.
I live in Olivet, and my district goes west, pretty much down Olive and down Highway 40, out to Chesterfield, out past Woods Mill. So I'm kind of right down the middle of St. Louis County. I don't really
Not
go.
Overland?
I don't have
Okay.
Overland anymore. That was taken away from me during redistricting.
So I wasn't totally off. At some point you had.
Yeah, I did, exactly.
But what's the feeling of the constituents when you talk to them?
Well, there's a lot of concern about a merger, partially because taking on the debt of the city, I think, is very concerning, because a lot of our municipalities are run very, very fiscally conservatively, and we don't have debt. We've got a lot of, cushion, rainy day funds, that kind of thing. So I think the debt was an issue. And of course, the elephant in the room was what we were going to do with law enforcement, and, I'm one of those people that realizes that crime doesn't just stop at the city-county border. It's an imaginary border. It's not like we have a wall or anything. So, I do think that there could be some benefits of looking at a more regional approach to law enforcement, because I want to make sure, that everybody is protected. And like University City, where we're filming this, is a great example of that. You're so close to the city that sometimes things spill over to University City,
I'm sure
so
it happens in the loop.
Yeah,
every weekend.
Right, exactly. So I think that that we need to have those conversations, and those are tough conversations, And then, of course, the thing that that Better Together never addressed, and I think it was intentionally, because it would be like the third rail and it would have killed the plan. But I do think there needs to be a discussion about how we can make things more fair and equitable as it relates to public education. So, I know a lot of people that have moved out to where we live, because they want to get to better public schools. So, I think we also have to have discussions about what we can do as a region to make sure that that things are as fair as possible.
And what type of change would you support on that? Not to put you on the spot, and but generally speaking,
right?
What would you think would that involve? Would that involve less dependence on property taxes and more use of other type of
I also think there's a way that you could create districts that were more fair and equitable as well. By having the city district all stand on its own, that just is naturally going to create problems. So, I think that we need to get some of the education experts together and just figure out, what some proposals would look like. But I think that even though it's a tough issue, it's an important issue. And, the thing about our children, like, we have a narrow window of time to have an impact on them as it relates to education. And I just feel like by us not addressing the inequity in that, we're not doing anybody any favors.
But that comes into play on rural school districts.
It does.
Even more so than on like poor urban school districts, because usually there's enough of a commercial, residential. The city of St. Louis certainly has all of downtown,
right,
paying property taxes, at least the downtown, that they haven't that they have
Well, yeah,
written off their
that's a
tax
whole nother
base.
show.
That's another show. But like in rural areas
Yeah.
where farmland and agricultural property is taxed so
like pennies on the dollar.
pennies on the dollar compared to not just compared to commercial property, but compared to residential
Right.
property.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real issue in rural, and if there's, I don't know how you address that without increasing the taxes on farmland, which is, I cannot imagine, a more politically difficult sale.
That would never happen, and I would not support
Food prices
that.
go up.
Right.
Like, that's a lot of,
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues there.
Right,
But
exactly. But
that is a real issue in how rural school districts fund themselves.
Exactly, and it's always been an issue. Like our homes are valued at a much higher rate, so naturally those personal property taxes are going to be much more generous. Yep.
Oh, absolutely.
But also, I wouldn't.
I know what we pay.
Yeah, I know. I know what I pay too. But also, like, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. So it's like a trade-off. So yeah.
Absolutely. So, what are your thoughts on the special election that we saw in West St. Louis County last week? Is that a one-time special election type thing, or is that, you think, a harbinger of a larger change in 2020 and perhaps beyond?
I do. I really do. I think that Trish Gumby's victory in the special election, the first part of November, it was really a litmus test, if you will. I feel like her victory showed that the voters in what is normally a red part of St. Louis County have had it with Republican policies, especially as it relates to common sense gun laws and supporting public education, for example. Those were big issues out there. And I think the voters are ready for like a fresh new approach to things. I think Trish Gumby, she ran a good campaign, so there's that. But I think she's a more moderate Democrat, if you will, and I think that the voters rewarded her for that.
I certainly think in the long run. I don't know if in the short run, odd things can happen in special elections. As you know,
exactly.
You won, but it was an odd situation.
It was, yeah.
But certainly it's got to be a real wake-up call in the long run.
Yeah.
To the GOP.
I think so too.
If places that not as recently as, I would say, 5 years ago, you would not have even imagined. This is all west of 270.
Yeah.
I think the district, maybe a small portion of it is inside 270.
I don't even think any of it is. So yeah.
It's definitely a.
Well,
got to be a concern, and even if it does turn around back in November, 1 year from now, November. I mean, that's sort of what happened in that Kirkwood. My historical example would be the Kirkwood seat,
right?
Where Kirkwood changed in a special, and people, it'll go back, and it did go back,
right?
Because Rick Stream was I think, a very good candidate, and
and well respected in the community.
But then after he left, it sort of changed, and it would be much harder to switch back. Now it's probably a permanently Democrat seat.
Yeah, I don't see how they can win that back. It's going to be open because Representative Lavender of Kirkwood is running for state senate out there. So in theory, that state rep seat will be open, but I don't think the Republicans can win it back. So, yeah.
One comment on one more bill, and I was going to comment on this, and not because Representative Lavender is running for that seat, but one of the bills I strongly supported last year, and I believe you, when it came to the House, I don't think it ever got to the full House for you to vote on, but with Senator Koenig's bill to much more further restrict TIF in the floodplain.
Right.
Tax increment financing in the floodplain.
That was a great bill. And I think we heard it did we hear it in Utilities or Conservation and Natural Resources? I remember hearing it at the committee level.
So you were on that.
Because Mary Elizabeth Coleman sponsored it on the House side, if I remember right.
Yes.
I did hear it at the committee level. It just never made it out of committee. I was a huge supporter of that.
Her version never made it out of committee.
Right.
Then I think a version later, just of Senator Koenig's, did get out, but it was so heavily amended.
Okay.
And I don't think that one went to your committee.
Okay.
But the key part is that it was able to pass the Senate unanimously, with some pullbacks from in the Kansas City areas, some compromise.
Right.
But do you think a bill like that, since we had not, when that bill was being debated, we'd experienced the severe flooding in northwestern Missouri.
Right.
That Iowa, Nebraska, we'd experienced that disaster. But the main bulk of the 2019 flooding in the rest of the state hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So do you think with the flood of 2019 that will help? Because if there's any sort of compromise that we can get, you might want to, can we at least get rid of the subsidies for floodplain development?
Right,
so
exactly.
Your thoughts there?
Well, I think, timing-wise, the majority party needs to take this opportunity in 2020 to get something passed because, legislators have short memories, and we need to realize how dramatic that flooding was this year in 2019. I've never seen anything like that. And I just think, although I'm a Democrat, I am very fiscally conservative. I do not support TIFs, and especially in an area where we know that it's going to be destroyed again. I mean, it's just I wouldn't waste my own money on that, and I'm certainly not going to waste taxpayer money. So I really hope that if someone from the majority party is listening, that they decide to take that bill and run with it, because it's important.
Well, I think he'll introduce it again. And
Good.
I hope, since it passed unanimously in the Senate last time, I would just hope that the House, and especially House leadership, can say, this is something that will have a long-term benefit.
Right.
We're not saying you can't develop the floodplain.
Right.
I would say that.
Right.
But we're not, other than within the National Flood Insurance Program rules,
Right.
you could, but we're not going to subsidize it,
Right.
which would dramatically
Right.
reduce the amount of floodplain development the moment you took those subsidies away.
Yeah.
Like, that would have a real effect.
Well, and what I sense from voters is people are very, very frustrated with what's going on in Washington, D.C. And I think our job as state legislators is to figure out ways that we can work together and not name call, not pit ourselves one against the other, but find things like this that we can agree on and work together. I think that's what the voters really want. And I think that we'll all be rewarded for that behavior in the end.
Well, I think that's a great hope for the 2020 session. For next year, I very much hope that idea comes to pass. So with that, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
McCreery.
Thanks
you
for the
coming
beer.
today. You're welcome. We'll chug it off camera.
Okay, good. Very good.
So thank you for coming and joining us today.
Glad.
Thank you for joining us for the Public Interest with David Stokes. We are now available on SoundCloud, which we're very excited about. So you'll be able to see this on either YouTube and listen to it on SoundCloud.